We live?
We're live.
Awesome. Welcome, everyone. It's July 5th. Yesterday was July 4th. I didn't go as hard as I could have yesterday, so yeah, I'm feeling pretty decent, but it is the day after Independence Day here in the US. So cool. So today I wanted to do some really basic authentication. We find this to be a pretty common use case that we need to solve for. So you can imagine there being like a white paper available for a user, and the client doesn't necessarily want anybody to just be able to access that. So we can create some basic authentication that says, okay, if you have this link, you can access this white paper. If you don't, then you can't. Similarly, we have like this discounts page here that we'll be playing with. So in theory, this discounts page could be accessible to only individuals that we want to access it. So we'll start with a really basic example of using a URL to determine whether it can be accessed or not. And from there, we'll potentially look at some other options. So cool. First off, let's make this page not accessible. There's a few different ways you can do this. The easiest is to just do a window.
Jared, you're not sharing your screen.
Oh,
If
yes, let's share my screen.
Thank you.
Cool. So here's the screen again. This is the discounts page on this Edgar Allan portal that we're playing around with. So in this case, let's pretend like these discounts are available only to individuals that we want to give access to. And so today this page is wide open, so anybody who comes to this URL will be able to access it. So the first thing I want to do is make it so that you cannot access this page. And we're going to use JavaScript to do that. There's all sorts of security issues with this being with using JavaScript to do authentication. The most obvious one is you turn off JavaScript and that page will just load. But again, we're not trying to solve for a really strong authentication. We're just trying to dissuade people or bots coming to this page to not actually be able to access the content. So what I was about to do is let's just write a window dot location equal to the root of this project. And now when I come here, you'll notice it redirects me. It's a little bit problematic actually, because let's just say google.com. This particular script is running on every page within that project. And so this is getting hit again and again and again. Let's see. Instead, let's do https google.com. So now if we go to discounts, we'll get redirected here. Okay, so we got some sort of protection. You can't just go to that page if you don't have access to it. We could do a little bit more around this. We could set the opacity to 0. And then you wouldn't have like this flash, but we're not going to worry about that now. So we'll just let that flash happen. Let the user know that there was something on that page, but they don't have access to it. So let's comment that out for now. Let's go back. Oops. Okay, let's see. hadn't saved that yet. So, okay, so we're here now. And what we're going to do is we're going to add a parameter. We're going to have that parameter be a password. So let's just use P for password equals, and we'll just use 1, 2, 3. So now when we come here, we'll be able to get this 1, 2, 3. And if this parameter is the correct parameter, we'll let the user in. If not, we'll bounce them to Google. Okay, so let's ask Slater AI how we can get a parameter. This is something, yeah,
Sorry,
go ahead, Jack.
I'll just make the screen big. So I'm just going to get rid of our face.
Yeah.
Really see what's going on here. Okay.
Okay. Cool. So in the past, the way I would get this is I'd Google how to get parameters from a URL. Let's just have Slater give us that information. So hi, can you get URL parameter with the name of P? And I'll just say, please use jQuery. So there's several different ways to do this. This looks fine. And this is nice because we've got this function that will get us a parameter. It passes in a name. So this name right here is P. And it will go through, this is regex, and come back with the regular expression and getting the location search. So this is going to get us anything past the question mark, I believe. And it will return this result of either null or whatever this, again, like this is using a lot of regex to solve this. It's not something that I'm really comfortable writing myself, so I really need to use something like AI to write it for me. But let's see if this is getting us what we want. So save that and come here, and we'll see down here we're getting exactly what we want. This 1, 2, 3. So if I change this to 2, 3, 4, again, I'm going to get that 2, 3, 4. So with that in place, it's really pretty simple. We just have to write an if statement. So if our p-value equals, let's say our password. So var password, let's even use const just to be cutting edge. And I'll just say, let me in. So if our p-value equals our password, then we can do something. Else, we can do something else. So I'll just say, can access page. Can't access page. And what we did here, so let's just move this over. And now they get bounced to Google if they can access it. If they can access it, let's just send an alert. Just say, hi, welcome to the page. This is a terrible user experience, so we'll get rid of that, but let's just play with it real quick. Okay, so I just got bounced because I used 2, 3, 4. If I use let me in, then it says, hi, welcome to the page. So, and we stay on this page. So let's make sure keep that here. Let's see what happens if I don't have a parameter. Okay, so it bounces me. So that's what we wanted. Cool. So that's kind of our lowest level. authentication. But there's several other strategies we may want to employ. So for example, we may want to only allow people to come if they are a whitelisted email address, or we could have a password that we share with the URL, and they have to put that password into a input. Before we kind of look at those other strategies, are there any questions with this initial solution?
No.
Can I ask something, Gareth? You know that it bounced back to Google. Would it just go to like whatever browser that you're using? Like say you're on Bing or Safari or whatever, it would just like bounce you straight back to that, or can you bounce the user to a particular page?
Yeah, we can bounce them anywhere. So maybe something we'd want to do is we'd want to be const root page, and we could say, let's say Edgar Allen. We could bounce them to this root page.
Nice.
So let's try that out. Cool. So it just bounced us to edgarallen.com. So that can be anywhere. And it could be like, we could set the opacity of the page to 0 and only show it if they have the right password. So we could have 2 sections even, where one section is just saying like, you don't have access to this. And if that were the case, so like, let's say, if you didn't have access to it, then you could say in section dot remove, and that would remove that content from the DOM even. And so then, like, again, if the user was clever enough to block the JavaScript, then they would still be able to access that hidden section. But if it was set to opacity 0, they have to be clever enough to say, okay, I'm going to come in here, and like, let's say this was opacity 0. So if the page loads with its opacity 0, then the user either has to have the password, or they have to know to come in here and set it to 0 to 1, or they have to know that they can look at the DOM and try to find that content. And if you go to a news publication, this is like, let's go to New York Times. Like back in the day, like there were all sorts of ways where you could come in here, and a lot of times the content was on the page, and it was just like tweaking the styles on the page to access it. Most of the big publications have figured out to not load the specific or not load all of the content. But even the New York Times, like there's ways to still access this without kind of putting in your credit card. So like any of these media publications, it is kind of fun to just see, can you hack it so that you can get access to the content, even if you don't have a login for it. So that can be a challenge for you.
Next later challenge right there.
Yeah. But also support your local journalism. So
yeah, that was a joke. Any journalist.
Cool. But yeah, what we are essentially doing is kind of, let's say, 2012 type media authentication, because it was quite porous back in the day where you could get access. And I bet like your local, let's see, Deseret news. I'm sure there's all sorts of solutions out there for media companies now where I don't think this is paywalled. There's different ways. I'm sure they have different options for better kind of paywall functionality. But back in the day, it was just like they just hid the content, and if you knew how to manipulate the DOM, then you could get access to it. Cool. Any
Jared,
other questions?
Marina's just put something in the chat.
I will copy this over and see how it does. So this is authentication code that she uses for one of her clients. So here we have a password variable, pass1. This quotation stuff, this is...
That's looking like that because it's pulling from Webflow, so you can change for anything.
Yeah, so like
you can just
this
replace it.
quote is
That's
essentially
because
the
it's
same as
all
doing this.
done.
Yeah, we have the password, and then we have the query selector for the pass overlay, the pass form, and the password. And on submit, we stop the submission. We make the password equal to the input. And if the password equals, then looks like we didn't get everything. We set the display to maybe block, I would guess. It's obnoxious that this keeps getting pushed over.
So just to clarify, Marina says, can we make it more secure when she says, can we improve it? Just in case that if anyone was like, how can we even improve this? That's what she means.
Yeah, I don't know if we should know where this code is running on a live YouTube session, but I would want to see like the page. But what's going on is we're taking a password form and we're just comparing the password to the user password. It's a little bit problematic in that, so this is on the page. So like a clever user could come find this pass1. Again, not that they're going to do that in pretty much all cases, because it would be hard to know where this is stored. But there's different places we could store a password. So we could maybe have like a fetch request to go up and grab the password. So there's different ways we could, I can never say the word, but obfuscate. Word, render, obscure, unclear. Obfuscate. That BF combination really gets me though. So anyway, what else could we do? You could, so what happens when you're doing authentication on a server is you're sending up that password, but I'm not an expert on this, but I think what they call it is salting that password. So there's all of these algorithms, and I think that's the right term to use here, that will change that password as it gets pushed up. And then the server is able to check against that salted password. And you can do something similar here where you could have a password and then you salt it, where you update it and then you check. When you check against that, you check against that that salted password. I think the problem you always run with client-side authentication is everything kind of has to be in the browser. So a clever user could kind of always find the different ways that you're doing things, unless you're going out to a server that's doing something. But that's never really an option for a Webflow developer, I'd say, unless you have someone helping you who really understands authentication and server-side authentication a lot better.
Jared, can I just ask maybe a question for anyone like me who's not a coder? In terms of using Outsetter or MemberStack or other things, obviously those tools are there's a lot more than just client authentication coming in with them. So maybe this is too stupid to ask, but in terms of like the advantages of maybe doing this type of approach, like actually using Slater to help you do client authentication rather than use those types of like pre-built systems.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you would advise someone to think about in terms of like, oh, maybe this, using Slater for this type of use case would be really helpful versus something like Outsetter or MemberStack or whatever?
Yeah, so MemberStack, I believe, for pretty much any authentication solution that isn't using a server, it can be cracked, or like the user can get around it. So MemberStack, like I've seen it in the past, like they do say like, don't put really sensitive information here, because if the user disables JavaScript and they can get around it. This was a clever approach. I can't remember who I was talking to who came up with this for one of their services, but you can have this no script tag here. So if JavaScript is turned off, then you have this meta tag, which will refresh every 0 seconds, so automatically, and it will send you to a URL. So this is a way of making sure that the user does not turn off JavaScript and get access to your information. So I didn't think about this earlier, but Marina, I would add something like this into your solution, because this requires the user to have JavaScript turned on, or they just get pushed to some other page. So that's the no script is saying, if there's no JavaScript, do something. And in this case, it's this meta tag refresh. Beyond that, so yeah, Outsetter, I like Outsetter as a tool a lot. We're using it on a server, and so we have more protection than I think they can offer automatically. One thing that we do is if you're loading data from somewhere else, then you cannot load that data if they don't have access to it. So that's where you can protect your users' data, is if I need to go out to get that data somewhere and I've turned off JavaScript, or I don't have the password, or whatever it is, then that data doesn't come back, and so it never shows up. So that's like you can protect your user data pretty well. But as far as like protecting content that you've authored within Webflow, that's where it gets really hard to protect that without someone clever usually can get access to it. Cool. Any other questions around that? Anytime you're working with really sensitive data, so that's user data, that's financial data, you do really want to have a server in the loop, because you can do all sorts of protection on the server that is not, that the user cannot have privy to, or cannot be privy to. So yeah, like the best security is on a server.
And if someone wanted to set up their own server, is that another live stream? or is
Yeah,
that
I mean, it's a whole new discipline. So what I love to write as far as server-side languages go is Ruby on Rails. And so I've got my own way of like, you have to set up your environment locally on your machine to write Ruby on Rails code, Ruby code in the Rails framework. You can then push it up to something like Heroku or some other platform that will run that server for you on a public URL, like a public server, or can make that server public. Where I'm not as familiar is using JavaScript to run a server. So there is Node, which is a JavaScript-based server, and there's all sorts of tooling around running a Node server. So I think Netlify is a good one, and that Node server is much more in line with kind of no code development or JavaScript development. I'm not that great with it. Like I've only kind of run some command line code to launch a server. So that's where I'm out of my depth, and I kind of just have to follow documentation when I am working with Node. But that is an option. Cool. Yeah, I think for most no-code developers, though, the use case is, okay, there's this marketing content that we want to hide so that a user has to give us their email in order to get access to it. So the way I would think about that is they could come to a page and when they go to that page, there's an input where you would take their email, and you may take that email, send it into, like, maybe you could use Zapier or something to send it into wherever your CMS is, and then send out an email with that link that will get them access to that content. That's a really common flow. Or you could just send them directly to that content after they've provided an email. So we have a little bit more time left. So let's just pretend like this here is asking for an email address. And when we submit that, we can then show these discounts. So the first thing I'll do is I'll just use JavaScript to hide all of this. This is not how you should do it. You should do it in Webflow, but just for ease, we'll just say .hide. So now when we come back here, all of those will be hidden. And so if we get a valid email address, then let's show that again. So if I take this input, so I'm going to get the ID off of this. It's just called input. Let's just comment all of this out for now. And we'll do input dot on. We don't have a button, so it's a little bit tricky. Like, how do we want to do this? We can say on key press. Let's use Slater for this. I think I could write this, but I bet Slater can do it better for me. Okay, so I'm going to say, I'd like to submit an email address. Let's say I'd like to capture an email address. When the user presses enter, please validate the user input. Make sure that the user input is a valid email. Let's say press enter on input. Let's try that. Not the best prompter as always, but the Slater AI is forgiving. Okay, so let's copy this over. Okay, so we've got this function. It's going to validate the email. It's using regex to test for that. So this will return a true or a false. And here we have the input. So on key press, we are going to say event which. So this event is going to be the key press event, and it's going to say which. 13 is the code for enter. And so if it is 13, then we want to do this. We want to get the value of that input, and we'll check if it's a valid email. If so, we'll console to the log valid email address, otherwise invalid. So that's perfect. Let's make sure that's working. So if I say test, invalid email address, test.com, that is a valid email address. So I could improve my validation to make sure that it doesn't have test.com. Like clients have asked me to do that oftentimes, but this is good enough. So it's pretty much checking for this @ and probably this dot. So it's a pretty basic email validate, but should work. Apologies, the kids are home and there is construction going on outside, so hopefully it's not too loud. Cool. So now that we can get this email, let's do the same check. So we can take this and we can show it. Another thing we could do is we could send the user to, like, let's say we add this back in. We could send them to a new page with that correct password on it. But since we're already on that page, we'll just show it. And let's just see if that works. So jfouls 82, valid email address. Maybe I didn't save it. Let's try that one more time. Valid email address, but we're not getting everything to show again. So let's take a look at our sources. And I'll do Slater 422. So let's mix it up show is what I'm expecting to have happen. So yeah, why is that not showing? So it's there. And let's look at so it's here. It is interesting. Why is that not showing? Okay, so display none on this. So mix it up, hide. Let's just not run this. Let's see. So what I believe we were doing, hide, that hides it. Now let's try to show it. Yeah. Let's try that one more time because I wonder if, oh, I know what's going on. Because this is a search form. So like if I start typing, we're duplicating this. So what I really should do is I should add an input at the top of the page. So I could do that really quickly. Just here I could say, let's say mix it up before, and let's create an input. ID of test. And you'll notice I'm running into issues with my tick mark. So what I'll do is I'll use this tick mark, make a template literal, I believe is what they're called. So I think that's all I need. Okay, so here's this. It's we could improve it a little bit just by taking all of these classes and adding it to it. I'm going to call this password input. And then down here, I'll use this password input. Okay, let's try that. So now when I type test, nothing happens because it's not valid. But if I write jfouls 2, now get my access to the content. So of course I could kind of improve the UI of this. I could move this input, put it up here. I could hide this search area until hide it until I have the email address in there. So any questions with that? So again, all we're doing here is we're manipulating the DOM. We're showing or not showing something based on some value that we're getting from the user, whether that's coming from the parameter or whether that's coming from an input. Another thing we could do, let's say that we want to whitelist only a few different email addresses. So I could have emails, like let's call this whitelisted emails equals jfiles82@gmail.com. It's my personal email address, so don't spam me. But we could come down here, we could validate that it's an email, but really we don't need to validate if it's an email if it's only one of a whitelisted ones. So what we could do here is, let's do it in the console because I need to play around with it a little bit. So here's the whitelisted emails. So if I have let email equal I want to say whitelisted emails, I think dot includes email. Oh. And that's coming back true. So let's change this email to be 83. And now let's try that. And that's false. This is the code we need. So let's just hide this and let's just create another if statement. So now when we do this, if I say test at test.com, it's an invalid email address. If I do jfouls, also said invalid. Let's see why that's invalid. Let's make a breakpoint. So email equals jfiles82.com. Anybody have any ideas why that's coming back negative? It's false, and it's false because the whitelisted email is all lowercase, and the user input email is all uppercase. So I can update this by doing, let's say, email dot, I think it's 2 lowercase. And if I put that in place of this, now if I try it, sorry, yeah, it works. Cool. So that should give you a couple of different strategies to lightly protect content. Any questions?
No, I think it's, for me, just super helpful to understand how client authentication works. Because I think if you use tools like MemberStuff or whatever, you don't understand just the kind of nuts and bolts of it. So it's just really, really useful to see. And so easy to do as well. It's later. I'm like, every time I do these office hours, I'm like, what the hell? That's okay. It's insane. Anyway,
Yeah.
It wasn't really a question, just good job.
Thanks. Yeah, and I mean, this is a very common use case with the clients that we work with. So we're putting up speed bumps to access content. Again, make sure that you're not trying to protect user data, that you're not leaking or potentially leaking sensitive data in any way. But if it's just like a white paper and this is just a tactic to get an email, this is more than enough for that use case. So, but cool. If that's everything, then we'll call it a day here. Next week, I think we'll probably play around with sliders. But if you have any JavaScript questions that you want to dig into, let me know. Earlier today, I was working with one of our developers around Greenhouse implementation. So listing all of the jobs for a particular client. There's good support for that from Webflow. So that's something we'll probably look at in the future as well.
Awesome. Yeah, great. And if anyone hasn't joined the Slater Slack group as well, send me a DM on Twitter, Slater_app, and I'll give you an invite code.
Cool. Well, hopefully it wasn't too loud as my dog barks, but thanks. And we'll see you.
I'm glad it's the dog and not the child.
Okay. See you, Jack.
Bye.